It's becoming a lot more digital, a lot more virtual, a lot more tool based. And when it comes down to it, we're mapping our track across what we need to do, when we need to do it, what documents can be hyperlinked in there. So it becomes a very digital canvas of how we can make this experience connective and collaborative. And like anything you could be doing on all these shared platforms, onboarding is done the same way.
Hello, and welcome to the All Onboard podcast, your go-to resource for all things related to employee onboarding. I'm your host, Thomas Kunjappu, founder and CEO at Theory. So today we are thrilled to welcome Sean Vader, Senior Director and HR Business Partner at Shutterstock. He's also held significant HR roles at companies such as Stripe and L'Oreal in the past. Sean is here to share his expertise on the diversity of onboarding processes he has seen across different types of organizations, the unique aspects of organizations of onboarding for C-suite executives specifically, and the critical role of internal contract, which is a great concept that enables many things, including successful onboarding programs. So with all that said, Sean, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Thomas. Appreciate it. Happy to be here.
There's a lot we can talk about, but I'd love to get started with just comparing your experiences. You have worked at so many different companies, from mature enterprises that were founded centuries ago to hyper-growth startups. Tell me a little bit about your experience being onboarded into these different companies and how you viewed it through your lens as both an employee and as being someone in HR.
Thanks. It's a great way to start. And I think that was purposely done also in my career, looking back now, to really have a good point of view on the experience it is when you join an organization. And like, for what it's worth, any team and being part of a new team when it comes to the work world. So for me, the experience in joining these different organizations really felt very different, with the same goal in mind, which is to get comfortable with the organization that you're joining, the team you're joining, and the role that you signed up for. The real big difference when it comes down to all of these is company size, the company's locations, their missions and goals, their history, and a lot of their cultural norms within. And when you put all those things together, you're going to get a different experience based on where you're joining and how you're supported and actually becoming comfortable in that role over time. So I would say when you put those things together, that's what makes each experience quite different.
So if you were to kind of compare and contrast, any examples of either moments that you remember that really stand apart and that's very unique to one particular company?
When I was part of the organization such as Stripe, when I joined them more specifically, they were in a moment of just very, very massive growth. And when onboarding with an organization like Stripe, they put a very high emphasis on ensuring that you are getting up to speed quickly, but quickly while focused directly on onboarding. So they have a program there, which you can read about online, called a spin up, where you are just specifically focused on onboarding. You are learning the content, you are building the connection, you are doing your compliance need, you are building a cultural connection to the mission of the company and the people you work around, but it's done in a way in which you can focus on it with speed and deliberate detail. And for their purpose, when I go back to reasons why they're all different, they had a very company driven mission to grow very, very quickly. So they want to get you through that in a focused way so you can jump right into the work and be comfortable as soon as possible. So that was a unique experience, but purposeful for what they were going through as an example.
That's really interesting. But then if you think about hyper growth, typically you might really want people to join and get productive as quickly as possible. But yet here with Spin Up, it sounds like there's a clear investment in getting people focused on learning in a focused way before going into the job, because managers might already be ready to go, right? Like, we finally got this great hire, but I need to wait another few weeks. Is it up to 6 weeks or more, just doing structured learning and getting into the role?
No, I mean, even quicker than that. I think what starts to happen is as you come out of that window of onboarding, you start to mishmash the getting into the work while still trying to learn. So there is an understanding that there is still this period that there's going to be learning. So the expectation is obviously you're not going to hit the ground running from there completely, but you're going to start to speed up from a nice walk of spin up and learning to a nice jog, to start to understand the connective pieces of your role to the people. What's nice about it is through your onboarding of those first 2 weeks, you start to really build the network. So you start to use your network on your job specifically through the next few weeks. And as you continue through what you can call the first 90 days of your role. So though it's a 2-week window, we still look at it as a 90-day window of being able to get up to speed but it's very, very heavy in that first 2 weeks to absorb as much as possible in a very direct way.
Hey, it's Thomas here. Hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Are you curious to see how your onboarding program stacks up against the industry's best? Check out Theory's latest onboarding assessment tool. It offers in-depth analysis and customized recommendations to enhance every aspect of your employee onboarding, from pre-boarding to company culture integration and more. Whether you're just setting up your onboarding program or you're a CHRO at a Fortune 100 company, this assessment can improve your onboarding know-how. Check it out at gocleary.com/onboarding-assessment. Again, that's gocleary.com/onboarding-assessment. You can also find the link in the episode notes. Now back to the show. Obviously, you have a lot of experience being onboarded as an employee, but I think your experience goes a little bit beyond that, right? So you worked in a lot of HRBP kind of roles where, of course, you're working with leaders and the broader HR team on the entire employee experience, but then you might have a specific focus as part of a broader team in terms of onboarding. Could you tell me a little bit about, from the HRBP kind of lens, what is the ideal involvement and relationship that you might have ideally in an onboarding process?
It's going to come down to who is being onboarded at what time and in what capacity. But I would say generally, when you look at an HR business partner's role, taking away onboarding more specifically, our role is to make sure folks are integrating in a detailed way into the teams and the company, in a way in which someone can feel like, I know what I signed up for, I know what I need to learn, and it speaks to the job description and what I learned in the interview process. Our goal as an HR partner is to connect those two things. Is what they heard before they joined connected to what they're going to learn now that they join. So for us, and this goes back to the contracting portion that you brought up front, contracting and using that term is playing a role alongside a team of folks who are involved in someone's onboarding. So for me, being connected to, let's say, an integration onboarding portion team of an HR team, you can call it many different things, different companies. My goal is to make sure that they are focused on getting that person quickly through the onboarding, specifically through the onboarding, and then passing them over to their manager in a healthy way. So the manager can connect the dots to what you learned in your onboarding to what you need to learn on the job. Someone like an HR partner comes in to really ensure that they're landing smoothly, checking in with this employee, making sure that what they've learned and what they've gathered is connected to the role and what they need to be successful, answering any questions they have. And then if we find a gap, pushing them in that direction and creating a relationship or connecting a dot for what they need to learn. That example can really fall into compliance, education of product or service. It can fall into a cultural need. It can really depend. And what I mean by depend even more is how senior is the person joining. So specifically, if they're C-suite, that's going to look like a different experience than someone joining in a more junior role and the role that I play. I am more likely going to be more involved with a higher level executive in their onboarding to make sure they're getting up to speed in a more specific, detailed way with partners than someone more junior who might get a more general experience. That's still checking all the boxes for what they need to learn. So it's good to be specific on the person, the when, the why, and more really about what they will want to learn as well. It can be customized, which is what it's so awesome about onboarding at different companies. You can customize it.
I'm glad you brought up C-suite onboarding and just bringing on someone who is going to be a leader into the organization, which, if done right, already we believe that doing onboarding well has a massive impact on the overall retention and productivity of the organization. But you can multiply that further, right? When you're talking about someone that you're bringing on from a C-suite perspective. Could you tell me a little bit more about that? If you think about different roles that you've played in bringing on a leader into an organization, when do you get engaged, and what are the kinds of activities that you're engaging in to make sure that they are the right fit and are getting what they need so that they can be a massive multiplier for the organization?
C-suites are going to be handled in very specific and maybe off to the sideways at some point. This is done specifically just based on what may be happening in an organization. Sometimes the organization is aware of the teams that a C-suite executive is coming. Sometimes we're doing it to get someone ready before they even join, so they can really make their way in for a nice landing to make everyone aware that there's a new joiner. It's going to depend on where the organization is in their hiring. But I think when we talk about C-suite, a lot of my experience actually with onboarding starts before they even start. And getting involved with a C-suite executive somewhere before their start date is super important, so they can proverbially hit the ground running. Because that's the expectation of someone at that level, is you come in ready, your onboarding will be less of the cultural norms, compliance norms, you're going to do that, but you're going to do it at a different pace. So for someone like myself, my experience has been actually meeting with a C-suite executive before their start date, and it's a customized experience. In some experiences, I built them specific data packs, understanding rosters, numbers, percentages, locations, things that are going to help them know things about their team. Performance data, for instance, is like great conversation about where people are in their spans and layers, their performance, to know what are they walking into from a structural perspective. And so someone like myself has a unique view of performers, the work that they're attached to, the prioritization and goals, and then how teams are structured for success. That's something I could bring to a C-suite executive before they start. They are armed better if they can absorb that before they start. So when they walk into their first couple of weeks of work and they're meeting folks, they can put the pieces together thinking, I saw this written down. I saw the review. I saw where, history of this team makeup. So that is happening likely before they even start. And obviously we're doing compliance pieces. So where we're making sure what they're seeing, they're allowed to see, but it's important that they can get a head start, a proverbial kickstart. Kick them in the butt, give them the information they need so they can start really making decisions and impact faster than your everyday employee. So that is a very specific, tailored experience. And then from there, I'm checking in more than anyone on a C-suite executive. More naturally, as you're a higher up HR business partner, that's your partner anyway. So continuous check-ins when you're starting with an onboarding is almost daily. It starts out daily to maybe once or twice a week. And then your normal cadence, which might be once a week, once every couple of weeks, depending on your organization. So becomes very tailored and becomes very custom.
And also the role of the HRBP in that onboarding process is much more front and center. Ultimately, the more senior a leader is, because a bigger part of their role is getting their whole team productive. So you're helping them help their team be more productive. And I almost wonder if you think about the engagement in onboarding, and we talk about pre-boarding, which is about from that moment someone accepts an offer to the day they start. But for executives, the onboarding or pre-boarding might start in some ways, honestly, even before they actually fully accept the offer, right? You're 90% in and you're really still figuring things out. You might be involved at that level to really get that person bought in to work with this org and understand what their org that they're walking into would be like. That's fascinating. And of course, with directors or managers, you get a version of that, right? All the way up to down to individual contributors, where the more senior you are, the more of a custom experience it might need to be. And maybe the more involved you are on the HRBP side, because as you said, you are their natural partner, right?
Yeah, that's right. And Thomas, no one here in the world of corporate can argue that arming a C-suite executive with people data is going to hurt them in any way. It's only going to make them better. Nowadays, more specifically, you join an organization, half of your problems you're trying to find solutions for as a leader are in the people space. The other half are going to be in the business, product, service, whatever you're looking to solve in the role that you're in. And this has been across numerous roles I've supported specifically, whether it be more technical roles or more sales related roles from a leadership perspective. Using that people knowledge is going to give you an insight of what your day-to-day and your role will be on that side as a leader. So again, that C-suite executive needs that view more deeply than your everyday individual contributor who might be joining an organization. So again, very tailored and specific.
Well, let's talk more about individual contributors, or more broadly, the concept of onboarding. You talked about Stripe and an example of like a fast growth kind of startup and how you might think about that. Can we contrast that a little bit with how larger organizations in your experience might look at onboarding?
Yeah, for sure. I started my career in a very large organization in the beauty industry at L'Oreal. L'Oreal is really well known for having such a cultural attachment to their history, their products, and their makeup, and no pun intended, just to makeup of how they are built and what they offer. And so a lot of people join the organization with that energy. And for anyone listening, there's the saying of the 4 C's. And I always add one because it adds to it. You're trying to build for the 4 C's of onboarding, which are compliance, clarification, culture, connection, and then in the end, it adds that 5th C, which is confidence. L'Oreal really puts a high priority on as well, bringing people through the onboarding. But the rush and the speed is a little bit of a different feel. L'Oreal brings folks through an onboarding, but focuses not only on the first 30, 60, 90, but what happens in the next 90 days. There's a world in which you can really think about where you start, your motivation to join is really high, but your impact is basically nothing and 0 because you're new. So an organization like L'Oreal understands that, especially when you're coming in to be small fish in a big pond when you're at a large organization. So they put a really good emphasis on doing that motivation contribution alignment, building that onboarding to where you're learning, seeing, feeling, touching, getting a sense of how products are made, how their history is built. There's so much more history about the company and their product suite that you're not going to be able to do it so quickly. So you need to spend time and nurture that onboarding. So when someone gets into the role, they can start to build their motivation and impact at the same time. Because building connection, networking, building that cultural attachment takes us much longer at a larger organization to feel comfortable. So you really see it as the first 90 days is kind of get comfy to understand the world in which you're joining. And the next 90 days, you're really going to settle in and you're really going to start to build up your contribution. So just a different pace of play. Same outcome when you look at other organizations, but you're going to take that approach in a different way.
Interesting. Are you suggesting it's really the complexity of the organization? Like there are so many different products. There are so many different ways of working. If you want to be successful in a particular project, you have to learn so many more names. All those things contribute to actually the complexity being higher, which is ultimately the point of onboarding is to get someone productive. You have to be a little bit more patient, I guess, right? Before you start to see the outcomes.
Yeah, patience is the key, and letting someone absorb in a different pace is definitely a play that a bigger organization should be taking. Because so it allows someone to really build connection at a different pace and a different scale. But again, you hope to get the same outcome. Now, L'Oreal, for instance, in a specific example, likes to focus on their history and their product suite. And so they really want everyone to really absorb that and feel that. In the end, as you know, working in other organizations too, you are going to represent them outside of your workday. They want to make sure you're prepared to walk out and represent that and own that as well. So that's a different type of feel when you're going through that exercise versus a hypergrowth company, which is learn it, test it, do it, go. And it's just a different way to look at it.
Let's get back into the tactics a little bit about onboarding. You're talking about this concept of having contracts at work, right? And specifically like for onboarding. Can you tell me a little bit more about how that works and the different types of roles that are coming together to make a great onboarding experience happen for a particular person?
Yeah, for sure. Anyone who's listening, watching this can think about an onboarding experience they've had, which not usually one person you're speaking to. You can imagine whether you're in a hybrid COVID experience that turned into more virtual to more in person, you're usually having different people come and speak to you about different topics. So you can imagine there is multiple people working together to make that experience connective and seamless. So you as the recipient feels no disconnect and you're just learning and you're absorbing. You're that sponge. When I talk about contracting, this is a term we use a lot in HR business partner world. Contracting is not getting someone from the outside signing a contract and, thanks, come on in and do the work. It's contracting with someone, which is I contract with you, Thomas, you do a piece of it, I do a piece of it. Together, it equals the full picture. When we think about onboarding, how do you contract with the other people in the mix that are important towards someone's new hire experience to make that experience fulfilling, holistic, connective, timely, and just succinct? Folks who are involved in that could be things like you have an onboarding team if you're big enough of a company. There might be specific coordinators who are setting up things like the invite, the content, the meeting. You have your benefit team who might be someone else you're contracting with who's going to come and present on things like compliance, benefits. You have business leaders who may be coming in to help present pieces of the business story, the product suite, the services. Someone like an HR partner plays a different role depending on company size. I'm going to contract with these people to make sure they're all ready to present and be together. Sometimes I'm not involved, depending on the experience of the onboarding at that company. And sometimes I'm one of those people who comes in and helps present an HR portion if we're small enough, which I've done that as well. So you have to contract up front to know how are the new employees receiving the right content to be ready for their roles. And so it has to be a contractual relationship between everyone to know what they bring to the table, when, why, and how. If you don't do that, it could be a bit of a free-for-all, and leaving it just for one person might work if you're small enough. But if you're a big organization, it's going to take a team to properly set that new hire ship sail into the organization.
So sailing into the organization is the point. And you're talking about the first layer, which is what you're contracting with. But I think the HRBP role specifically becomes a glue point to get into the actual day-to-day. Because the one role that we didn't quite mention there is management. The new hires manager, who over time will become the primary person to continue pushing and onboarding this person to be a productive part of the organization. How do you contract on that side of the equation, of which might then come down to specifics? We talk about executives, but what about just regular employees? And as an HRBP in that relationship with managers, what does that contract look like? Who is doing what and what's expected of each other?
The best experience you could see sometimes is someone goes to an onboarding and the manager is there at the door when the onboarding is done and says, "Come with me, you're mine now, and I'm going to show you the way." That's a really good experience because you get that handoff and the manager knows now I get to take my employee into this experience of learning the job itself and my management style, et cetera, and everything that comes with that. What happens before, the natural relationship between an HR manager, an HR business partner, HR generalist in some places, people partners, you have different names for it, is to have the relationship with the line managers up to this point for them to already know, hey, I interviewed this person. I know their strengths already from what I see. And you turn that conversation into, well, they're starting on this day. And how can we set you up to hand this employee off to you for their role to set sail into the organization? And in some organizations, there are toolkits that a manager can get to help someone on board. Many organizations I've seen, there's a collaborative effort between a manager, sometimes their team itself, and an HR partner where they create a checklist, something that the employee can do now they're out of onboarding to acclimate to the organization that they're in, get to know team members, learn some of the content, some of their OKRs, priorities, share internal documents and tools from that team. So the onboarding from a company perspective up here starts to become an onboarding on the team level at the next level down. And that's on the manager to do. So the HR partner becomes, like many things, a connector of dots, which is here's what they're getting up here at company onboarding. Here's the gap that you need to fill from a team onboarding. They are separate events, which is why when you come out of a company onboarding for what it's worth, it doesn't stop there. The manager has that responsibility, and you're usually working with HR partner to set up a structure. Some companies have a structure that you rinse and repeat. Some you customized based on groups of employees joining level, et cetera. The HR partner to the manager is a big piece of setting that up and making sure that the clear role and responsibility is there. And that's where we check in with managers as we normally do anyway, as part of our HR partner relationship along the way.
So it's important, but it's also kind of behind the scenes, right? The work that you do from the new hires perspective, right? So you might be potentially representing HR in the general onboarding, but most of the work that you're doing is behind the scenes and supporting the manager.
That's right. You can say this for a lot of the work HR partners could do is behind the scenes in a lot of ways. A lot of it's front facing as well. For anyone listening, there's always a great HR partner behind the scenes around just about specific and legal-based decision making, including onboarding, to make sure someone is getting ready and onboarded specifically for their role to be successful. Because in the end, that could turn into other instances and things that an HR partner has to manage through with the manager later on. So we're very heavily involved there, but not as much seen. And that's on purpose.
So then if you think about that role more broadly that you've had so much experience in, do you see that evolving in any particular way with remote work or hybrid work and changing expectations with new generations of how you might be involved in things like onboarding or in general relationships, having relationships with managers?
Yeah, it's becoming a lot more digital, a lot more virtual, a lot more tool-based. And when it comes down to it, we're sharing shared docs, Google Sheet, where we're mapping our track across what we need to do, when we need to do it, what documents can be hyperlinked in there. So it becomes a very digital kind of canvas of how we can make this experience connective and collaborative. Like anything you could be doing on all these shared platforms, onboarding is done the same way. Can it be more specific and detailed for onboarding itself? For sure. We can in 20 minutes stand up an onboarding on a Google Sheet if we really wanted to, and then contract with the right collaborators to build the content. That is a way of doing it in the world of virtual and how we're talking today. This is how a lot of it's done. I think there obviously is a preference to do onboarding in person to build that connective nature with someone, but the reality is hybrid remote. This is the way that we do it now, which then turns everything into digital ways of going about it. People are still getting things in the mail to help them feel the connection of what they're doing. Swag packs, their laptop in the mail, nice letters that help them feel that connection, but this isn't going away. So the onboarding experience becomes digitally based and tool based.
Absolutely. And then I'm curious about the role of HRBP in performance. When HRBP is very intimately involved in helping leaders and organizations figure out performance for the entire organization. Now, we've been talking about onboarding, and you're rolling out the red carpet and getting the person integrated into the organization and behind the scenes by helping managers do that. So when do you actually start translating that into starting to think about performance for this new hire? When are you moving from rolling out the red carpet to being specific about expectations and outcomes?
It's a 30, 60, 90. It's the most common term you hear, but it's not there just to set up structure around time. It's there to create check-in points and formality. So what you're looking to do is setting up a structure around a 30, 60, 90 and kind of increasing the progressive nature in which you're creating the structure. Within 30 days, setting up that type of structure might be too hard for an employee to wrap their head around while they're still learning. But as you go through the 30 into the 60 into the 90, you get a sense of someone's ability to speed up or slow down and what they need to be successful and turning it into what the goals is relative to the roles and responsibility of the job. Proverbially, you can look at a job description and say, turn this job description, match it to our goals and priorities, and then create this track for what someone needs to do to be successful. Someone like an HR partner, his goal is to be checking in with this manager across that way to say at 30 days and 60 days and 90 days, how is that going and how's that structure evolving? We might help in creating the structure. The structure might be there already from past company structural approach, but our goal is to make sure they're doing that in a healthy way. The goal is to not surprise the employee with any feedback along the way too, so they know along the way where they need to take little turns left and right to be going on the right track after their 90 days. And then from there, you treat it like any manager-employee relationship. But if you set it up correctly off the new hire, you get a sense how someone's progressing through their newness. And sometimes that might turn into a mishire, but you're getting a sense of that if you're doing this structurally with a 30, 60, 90-day window. And really, we're using tools for that too. Documentation, shared notes, tagging, and a lot of virtual conversations at certain time points. We're putting things on calendars, 30 and 60 and 90 days with managers. They come to the table with us and we have an open conversation. And then we help course correct from there or keep them going on their path for that purpose of performance.
That's really important because we know how important management is and the role of managers is in getting a new employee productive. And what you're describing is not just enabling managers, but also holding them accountable at the same time, which is, I guess, part of the contract that you have there, right? To ensure that they're successful as managers as well.
It is the part of the contract that works both ways. HR partners are advisors to the business. We are not the decision makers, but we can advise them on where certain scenarios could take them if certain structural approaches aren't adhered to. And so for our goals, always put that out front, explain the why behind it, give the context, and push the managers to play that role in our contract. But make them aware that HR partners have a big part of that contract too, and you can rely on us if you're unsure or need support along the way. And that's where having that trusted relationship and being in the middle is super important for roles like this.
Imagine I am working with a small team with a few managers where I understand that there's a pattern where a few managers are just not holding up their end of the bargain in terms of helping their employees get onboarded to productivity. How do you know that, first of all, besides just this spidey sense? And how would you advise me about how I would go about trying to course correct there?
First of all, a good HR partner would say they're involved in the title, but we're in HR and we're in the business. So we should always have some type of spidey sense of how the business is performing at a high level, but also at a team level for who we're supporting and how they contribute to the overall success of the company. So sometimes an HR partner gets a wind of this before a manager might and say, how is your team contributing to X, Y, and Z in the goal? Sometimes it comes the other way around where the manager says, these are my employees who are not contributing. And here are some things I want to share with you, HR partner, on what I'm seeing. What that turns into is things we just talked about, which is how did we get here? And what has been done to get to this point? What action have you taken? Have you had conversations? How is it connected to their onboarding if they're new? If they've been here for a long time, what did their last performance review and feedback look like? You put all these pieces together, you can get a sense of how someone is truly performing up against company results. This could happen at big companies or small companies. You can treat smaller teams in a big company in the same way you treat a team in a small company, which is connect their role to the performance of the team and their needs connected to company goal up top. Every company and every team is organized by being connected to one lever that's helping the company build revenue, build success, build something for their growth. you use those levers to understand how those individuals are contributing, and then they get individually. So it starts very objective, but it comes subjective when you talk about individuals and their contribution. And that starts to unlock a larger conversation about what needs to happen or what doesn't need to happen with a certain individual.
Got it. So in these scenarios, are you talking directly to the new hire? Let's say I'm seeing that the manager's not quite holding up their end of the contract. I want to make sure this person has a great experience. Are there boundaries to your role? How do you think about that?
No, I don't think there really aren't many boundaries at this point, especially when it's a new hire. When it's a new hire and they're in their newness, there's not many boundaries around what you can and cannot do with a manager because it's shared success. If a new hire does well, it's a great thing for the organization as a whole, which is great for the HR department. It's great for the manager and their team. When these things happen, let's say I check in with an employee and they're 60 days in and they say, my manager is great. I feel like I still don't see this side of what's happening on the team or the business. I think they can do a better job there. And I would start to investigate with this new hire. What have they learned or what exactly do they think they're missing? And not to say that the manager isn't doing it, but to create a feedback loop. A new hire might not feel comfortable giving feedback to the manager directly. So it's an HR partner's tack to go in and say, let's talk about what you think you're missing. Is this something you want to carry back to your manager in an ask? Do you think they'll be able to help you and build this next big picture? Or, hey, I can talk to your manager about how we can make this a better experience. We can do this together. Again, creating a contract with the new hire. How do you want to handle this? And this is how we handle a lot of scenarios, which is I don't have to run and do this. If you want to ask and ask for more clarity for your success, we can talk about that approach. You go off and do so, and we can connect in a week. If you want to talk about something I can do as a company level to get feedback on the onboarding program, what is that? Let me ask details. Let me poke at it. Let me get to the why behind it. I can section that off to your manager and maybe upwards to make it a better experience for the next person and yourself. It's going to be specific, but we definitely play a role in that. And I think there's no boundaries when someone's brand new. And I think you really want to help someone get everything they need to be successful, regardless of any assumptions a manager may have.
A key input, it sounds like, for that is that touch point, right? So if that is just part of the process where beyond the manager and the team, someone, maybe it's the business partner, HR business partner, but someone from probably HR or outside of that org is checking in with this person, that really helps get that other perspective and ensure the likelihood of success to be even higher. I wonder if an onboarding buddy could have a similar kind of role, or is that maybe that's actually a different perspective, not doesn't quite cover the ground that you might with the, let's say, the gravitas of being in HR?
Yeah, hiring buddies are a thing. I've seen that play out more often than not, but a hiring buddy will only do so much in that scenario. A hiring buddy can definitely fill in the blanks, connect the dots, but may also only have a purview connected to maybe the org they sit in or the team that they're a part of. When creating new hire buddy systems, it's always really thoughtful to get someone totally out of bounds who's not part of that organization. If you're a salesperson and you're a new hire, give them an engineer. Let them give you a totally different perspective, someone who's been around for some time. Or you can flip it on its head, depending on the organization size and scope. Give someone brand new or who is just out of their 90 days as a new hire buddy. They'll give you some insights as, hey, I'm 3 months ahead of you. This is what I saw. You're going to hit this too. So this can be very specific. But again, something you set up when you're talking to a manager, usually one of those questions that when you're building a checklist is, could a new hire buddy help this new hire? Usually the answer is yes. And then you go into specific and maybe a little bit nitpicky on who that is, because you'll get a different experience just based on a buddy system as well. But definitely a good tactic that can be used as well.
Yeah, we actually started seeing success for all of the above because we have an onboarding buddy product, and we've seen companies do the same, like really the same type of role in the same location. And that's what we want as a buddy, or a completely different seniority level, country, location, and department. And that's what the buddy program is. There's flavors that end up becoming more like mentorship programs. From my perspective, as long as you just get more touch points that lend to positive exposure incrementally to the organization.
Exposure is the word, Thomas. Think about it this way. We're both remote right now. We just started a company. If we sit here in our room by ourselves, go through an onboarding, you log off, and you don't have a touch point for a week, you're there to sit with your assumptions and your beliefs and what you saw on a slide. But if you have touch point with an HR person, with a buddy, with a manager, it gives you ways to validate any assumptions you have, data you may have seen, history or a story you may have heard, and it allows context to be built and how that applies to you. And I think that's how someone can really start to feel the connectivity when you talk about, again, the 4 C's of onboarding. By doing that, you're building clarification, you're building the connection, you're building the culture. 3 of them are right there. Compliance is things you're doing actively, taking trainings, compliance needs, signing some documents behind the scenes. But the other 3 are hit just by having connection, just by talking to people consistently and having touch points. So you can't miss that. That's the most needed part of an onboarding.
Hey, it's Thomas here. Now, you and I might think it's obvious that people are your biggest resource, and investing in your onboarding program to make it world-class is a bet you want to make. But how do you talk about this with your CEO or CFO so that you can get them on board with investing in an updated onboarding program? They're always looking for something that can save money and boost productivity at the same time. Well, I've got something exciting for you. Check out Cleary's onboarding ROI calculator. It's easy to use. Just enter some info about your current onboarding process and your company and see how much time and money you could be saving with a modern onboarding solution. Head on over to gocleary.com/onboarding-ROI to give it a try. See what you learn and let us know what you think. Again, that's gocleary.com/onboarding-ROI. You can also find a link in the episode notes. Now, back to the show. So if I were to play that back, you want to make sure you're talking live with new hires, even in the business partner role with new hires and their managers, at least like once a month in the first couple of months.
Yeah. I have a new hire in my organization who I shot a Slack to yesterday, who was in for a week and didn't say anything for a week, went through onboarding. And now I pop up to say, we're going to set up time, see how it's going. Let's try to fill in some gaps. It's all about knowing your organization style, the flow in which onboarding occurs company-wide, and where HR partners and managers contract. Doing that thoughtfully works into a great experience, but live touch point, nothing can beat it.
Nothing can beat it. Absolutely agree. This has been fascinating, Sean. So I would love to, without any further ado, get into our lightning round of questions.
Oh boy.
Are you ready?
All right. Yeah, hit me.
Gonna go fast. So dogs or cats?
Oh man. Depends who you ask. Once a dog person, now a cat person.
Okay. I thought you were going to say always a dog person. So I know you have a young son, you're a dad like me. What's been a recent funny memory from your son?
A recent memory is waking up and having toys thrown all over the room. Now, being a little more handsy, the baby's throwing stuff all over the place. A recent memory is organizing a whole room, keeping it nice and organized and fresh. And now, because there's more tactical feel and hands, things are getting put everywhere and thrown all over the place. I'm now losing all of my child's things because they are throwing it everywhere. So that's a recent memory of now learning where things are placed, because that little one is going to throw it around every chance they have.
Don't try to ask yourself, what's the point of cleaning up?
Yeah.
So let me switch gears and ask you a different question. If you weren't working in HR, what do you think you might be doing instead?
Oh man. Probably something with tech. I'm a big techie guy. I don't know what it may be specifically, but I get enjoyment out of breaking tech apart, rebuilding it, soldering, messing with wires, more of a like tech electrician type of person. Something in that space really gets me going. Something like that. Call it Geek Squad type of stuff. Maybe something like that. You know, people can get frustrated with tech quite easily. So being able to help people there is fun for me.
Awesome. What's a piece of advice you might give someone which is based on something maybe that you've received in your career or something that's always stuck with you?
Yeah, I think being curious with your network is such a great piece of feedback I got early on, which is 2 things, which is use your network. You have a network, whether you realize it or not just your followers on LinkedIn or your connections, who around in your life. Use your network to help you, but then be curious about what help is being offered with your network. Ask questions, get to know people and their true meaning and their intent. And vice versa, you do the same. You never know what you get out of that relationship. And for me, I've been able to learn so much and build a great network just by doing those 2 things together and using the network and being curious with them.
So last one here, what do you enjoy most about your current role?
Yeah, over the years of doing HR partnering, there's highs and lows of the role. Any HR professional listening would know there's good weeks and there's bad weeks. There's easy problems and there's hard problems. I think when it comes to working in HR, what I enjoy most about it is being able to help someone solve their people concern, whether it's a leader or a manager in solving a big complex people problem, whether it's reorganizing, shifting people, bringing in people, maybe letting people go. It's hard things on the face, but the result you get emotionally also, as well as tactically from a business, is fulfilling for an HR person. We're sometimes in a thankless job. So when you get that thank you for doing that thing and maybe helping someone sleep a little better at night because it was on their mind, that's what I enjoy most about working in HR. And I've had a lot of instances and leaders I've worked with who have shared that with me as well as being on the receiving side of the work. So that to me is the enjoying part of the role.
Well, I don't want to skip thanking you, Sean, for this amazing conversation. And to everyone out there, I want to say that's a wrap for today's episode of All On Board. I hope you found the conversation with Sean here today as insightful and valuable as I did, and especially for your own onboarding effort. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to stay updated on all things onboarding and the latest tips and trends there. And also stay tuned for Thomas's take, where I'll share my thoughts and reactions to the advice Sean has just shared with us today. And until next time, keep working on your onboarding processes and create that welcoming environment for all of your new hires. Bye now. Thanks, Sean. Hey there, Thomas here with my take on that fascinating episode. Now, there were 4 key takeaways I had as I was reflecting on this conversation, and I want to go through them a little bit. First and foremost, simple concept, but it's worth mentioning. Organization complexity maps to the amount of effort you need to invest into onboarding. The more complex the organization, the more you need to invest in onboarding. Now, if you think about onboarding as taking potential energy, the excitement and energy from someone who just signed an offer and is excited to take on this new role, into kinetic energy, a productive employee who is able to work meaningfully to produce results within the context of this organization. Well, if the organization is complex, there's just more you need to do to invest in making this person move from point A to point B. So if the organizational hierarchy is really complex, or there are several business lines, several product portfolios, really complex industry lingo that they need to understand, there's multiple locations, multiple departments, complex decision-making processes. All of this just means that you need to spend more time in ensuring that you're helping onboard them into productivity. Now, of course, this can beg the question, why is this organization so complex? Can we tamp down the complexity? And organizational design often attempts to do that, but that's for another chat. But still, I think it's helpful to think about as you're designing an onboarding process, thinking about all the different ways that the organization is complex and making sure that the onboarding process actually maps to that type of complexity. Second concept, the HR business partner's role in onboarding. I was thinking about what it actually is. It feels a bit nebulous. It's like a chameleon, this HR business partner. Now, they could be directly involved if you're talking about onboarding someone in the C-suite, oftentimes. However, they could be completely in the background and only really be nudging and enabling managers, if at all, for many other types of employees. But it seems like this ultimate utility player for your cross-functional onboarding squad. So the HRBP can really help behind the scenes to enable managers and enable the leaders to enable their managers to ensure that the departmental onboarding is going really smoothly and to plan. And yet, by the same token, they can help influence and sometimes even take part in the global onboarding with their relationship with the broader HR team. So I think it's pretty interesting. And really, it's like this utility player, luxury, enigmatic resource that should be leveraged in the onboarding process if and when possible. And ultimately, you want to make sure that your HRBP is involved with an employee sometime in the onboarding process, because ultimately they will be involved with them in the performance review process. So it's best to ensure that there's some engagement ahead of time, and this will help the HRBP provide value for the managers and directors and leadership, as well as to the employee themselves as they go from those first few days to that dreaded performance review. Another concept I really wanted to talk about here was all about C-suite onboarding. Now, C-suite onboarding, where you're bringing in key leadership positions into the organization, it's almost a beast all of its own. And one way to think about it is the more senior the position, the earlier in the onboarding process you need to be engaged with more levels of detail and scrutiny and more customization. By the same token, the more senior the role is, the more will likely be demanded of the HR team and of the organization in their onboarding process, because they will be pretty experienced and be sucking information, pulling information out of the organization that could be quite bespoke for them to be actually successful. Now, the HRBP role is fascinating within the role of C-suite onboarding, because often if you're bringing in a C-suite leader, you'll be pairing them with an HRBP and having them engage ahead of time, almost as someone to arm that person with data to understand their organization within limits, of course. It's super helpful and will also help bring in that relationship, which will help that organizational leader enable their entire organization. Now, I also wanted to make the observation that this is not just about seniority, it's really about ownership and accountability. I can talk to you about the world of startups, where people might come in with a little bit less experience, but not layers of team members that they're managing, but significant ownership portfolio that they actually have to engage with from day one. This has a similar dynamic. You end up doing onboarding in the late stages of the candidate experience or the interview process, and it ends up becoming more bespoke, and the employee with high agency and autonomy is going to pull out a customized onboarding process from you and from the organization. One last concept I wanted to talk about that came out of this episode is the concept of internal contracts. Contracts, of course, are a great way for two different entities, a vendor and a customer, or a consultant and a company, to come to terms on exactly what they're getting this product or this service in exchange for this amount of money on these particular terms. And that helps us just really clarify what is expected from all parties. Internal contracts across employee groups is super helpful. This was brought up within the context of onboarding, because onboarding process is truly a cross-functional process. It includes people who are working together with one shared mission and goal, but crucially, they don't necessarily report into the same manager or organization, hence cross-functional. The idea of having written agreements saying, hey, I'm going to be doing this on this time for this employee, and you're going to be doing that at this time for this employee, and getting a sense of what are all the things that somebody needs to do at some point for all employees, having that all clarified and written out in some kind of format, even in the most rudimentary format, it would be in some kind of document. Of course, with Cleary, we have some great templates, which really helps you think about what are the different roles between managers and HR side, the new hire and onboarding buddy. What is everyone going to do, and by what time frame, and how can you hold each other all accountable? It's really useful. Reflecting on some of the roles that I've had in the past, the same concept has worked for cross-functional teams of any type. A classic example is the cross-functional engineering, product design, data science teams that are building modern tech companies. Often these folks are reporting into different managers, and yet they're sitting together or virtually sitting together, focused on the same goal, and need to be working together, even though there's not necessarily one key owner of the entire thing. Everyone's working together to hit the same kind of goal and outcome at the same time. And having written working agreements is a great way to accomplish this. It makes perfect sense for any kind of high-functioning, cross-functional process, including an employee onboarding process. So, hope that was helpful for everyone. I had a great time on this episode. I'll see you guys on the next one, because that was me, Thomas, with my take. Bye now.